Hello, everyone. The following is a re-recording of my doctoral dissertation defense that occurred on Saturday, December 11th, 2021, between the hours of 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Wherever or whenever you are viewing this video, it is important to understand that the messages and ideas you're listening to in the moment are continuously evolving. The work of AloHā is spiral in nature. As you engage with this work, you enter into the work like a spiral. You become part of it, you listen to the words, you're moved by the words, and you are transformed in the process. My hope is that each time you come back to listen to this recording, it will serve as a source of fresh insight, growth, and evolution that you can come back to again and again and again. Once again, this recording is being recorded as if it is taking place on Saturday, September 11th, 2021, between the hours of 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. Aloha kakayaka. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for choosing to join me on a Saturday. Wherever you are signing in from, I appreciate you for sharing this time with me. Before we begin, it's important to share how I'm entering this space. First of all, my stomach is churning and I can feel how my breath is shortened. In this moment, I am cultivating an awareness of my somatic response around this incredible occasion. These past few days have been filled with a cascade of emotions as this date came closer. I am not nervous about presenting my work. However, I am very aware of the profound implications of presenting my finalized work, personally, professionally, and academically. For the past 30 years, the 2 weeks between November 29th and December 11th have marked a time of grief for my siblings and I. This November 29th was the 30th anniversary of our father joining our grandparents in the realm of the ancestors. On Thursday, December 9th, our father would have celebrated his 86th birthday. December 9th is also the 11th anniversary that our mother fell terminally ill, and today is the anniversary of when she was reunited with my father and became an ancestor herself. My emotions are high as I stand before you, fully aware of the somatic responses in my body. I was asked, why did you pick today to defend your dissertation? My answer was that through this journey, I realized that although my parents may not be witnessing my defense in the flesh, they are here with me in spirit, and they've brought all of my ancestors with them. It is with great hope that the work I present to you today will bring much honor to those whose shoulders I stand upon, stand with, and stand for. But before we dive into indigenous frameworks and decolonization, I would like to invite my older sister, Bernie, to bless our time together as we engage in this sacred work by sharing a prayer through hula. Thank you, everyone. My heart is so moved by everyone that is here witnessing this momentous event. Mahalo for my sister Bernie Ebalaroza Toyama for the beautiful hula that she danced at our mother's celebration of life 11 years ago. And for her son, my nephew, Kekolu Nahinu, for putting together this video. On the screen, you will see the outline of what I will be covering in today's presentation. Of course, these are the highlights of my dissertation. My full dissertation will be available in early spring. For me, the first step towards decolonization and moving towards healing and reconciliation for all people is to acknowledge the importance of my connection to the Aina, the land which has sustained me and nurtured me throughout my life. It is imperative to recognize that no matter where we are in this country, our feet stands on indigenous grounds. Therefore, my first acknowledgement is to honor the tribal lands in which my writing has taken place. Mahalo to all the native tribes of Washington State, specifically the Tulalip tribes and the allied bands for housing, feeding, teaching, and nurturing me and my ohana for the past 36 years. Mahalo for sharing the Coast Salish lands and the waters of the Salish Sea. I am forever grateful. To the Nooksack and Lummi tribes to the north for sharing your medicine of healing and respite, especially when I needed it the most. I acknowledge and honor the lands in which my grandmother birthed my mother birthed me, and her mother birthed her. The blood of my ancestors and the spirits of their existence on the Hawaiian islands of Oahu, Kauai, and Maui, the provinces of Bohol and the city of Cebu in the Philippines. It is through this genealogical connection that connects me to the Ko'olam mountain range on Oahu, the Grand Canyons of Waimea on Kauai, the sacred mountains of Haleakala on Maui, the rugged peaks of Cebu, and the vegetable farms of Bohol, and of course, the Pacific Ocean that brings it all together. I would not be here if it were not for the giants whose shoulders I stand upon, who have ascended into the spirit world and live within my DNA. These are my ancestors, my parents, Roy Ebalaroza and Gloria Philomer, my maternal grandparents, Perfecto Philomer and Natividad Moreno, and my paternal grandparents, Sergio Ebalaroza and Mary de Coscos. These are my pillars and my greatest teachers. They are the reflection of who I am, the very best and the worst of me, simultaneously. But overall, it is these individuals that have taught me patience, acceptance, self-preservation, boundaries, tact, and unconditional love. My siblings, Chris, Bernie, and Michelle, and my brothers, Mark and Roy. My sons, Edward Mananui and Ryan Ali'inui. And I'd also like to acknowledge the amazing and brilliant women who stand by my son's side. My daughter-in-laws, Alicia, Jessica, and Kim. And last but not least, my husband, my partner, and my best friend, Jeremy Tunnell, who I acknowledge has taken the brunt of my frustrations throughout this journey. I am also blessed and would like to acknowledge the many rocks that make up my foundation, my 30 nieces and nephews, grandnieces and nephews, all of my aunties, my uncles, and my many, many cousins. And all of you who are here today, my friends, my colleagues, and my extended family. These are my reasons and my purpose for why I do what I do. My mo'opuna kane, my grandsons. What my ancestors did for me, I will do for them. And I build these shoulders for them to stand upon. It is an honor to acknowledge the wisdom and guidance of my chair, Dr. May Elawar, and committee members, Dr. Joanne Gozawa from CIIS, and Dr. Alma Trinidad from Portland State University. To the 11 co-researchers for breathing life into my story, by sharing their stories of personal decolonization and living the way of aloha, they have brought the mana, the spiritual essence, into the heart of my research that binds us together throughout this entire journey. Dr. David Palaita, Dr. Michelle Herrera, Dr. Sandra Littletree, Dr. Anthony Craig, Dr. Tom Murphy, Will Nelson, Sharon Chang, Deborah Parker, Fern Renville, Chelsea Craig, and Roger Fernandez. Throughout this journey towards my PhD, the lessons that emerged have challenged me to see the world not as I want to, but as it is. I was taught to build the inquiry, not to begin with the outcome in mind. I have learned how to ask questions and take the journey of discovering or rediscovering the answers. And I am finding that I am continuously on that journey. In my dissertation, I chose to explore the origins of aloha. This took me on a path of self-exploration that led me through the story of global colonization. It was not an easy discovery, but it did help to move me deeper into my work. Learning is a gift, even when pain is the teacher. Being in conflict, a battle, or even a struggle means that there are dualities at play. One emotional thought or idea is working towards overpowering or taking command over another. But yet, transformation is in full effect. The discord between entities can be analogous to the chaos when the caterpillar turns into a butterfly. In the process, the caterpillar becomes a liquid mess within the chrysalis. Metamorphoses take place and the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. Nature teaches us that a caterpillar must surrender to the rule and course of its transformation. The butterfly does not hold on to outcomes. It relinquishes from being a larva to a caterpillar. It yields again to the process that moves it from the caterpillar to the chrysalis. The growth of change occurs until the final emergence of a butterfly is realized. Each phase of the butterfly's life is an intimate relationship within the acceptance of surrender and transformation. I will start with sharing where my research began. To decolonize, I needed to return to the place where colonization took place, home. During a research trip back to Hawaii, my husband and I spent 2 days at the Bishop Museum, going through old archives, sitting in on film shorts, and listening to lectures on Hawaii's history. What we had discovered was an alternative story to what we commonly celebrate as the Hawaiian unification. The victory of King Kamehameha I as he brought together the islands of Hawaii. What is not talked about in the story is the assistance of Western power. Captain Cook had found his way to the islands of Hawaii in 1778 and set about recruiting the minor noble house of Kamehameha. Agents of the British Crown aided the young nobleman in his quest to conquer. This ensured that the valuable port in the middle of the Pacific Ocean could be in a stable position to resupply ships and fleets and assist England in the establishment of naval dominance around the world. Kamehameha's unification of Hawaii in May of 1810 was part of the global European colonization that had been occurring all over the world since 1492. The new Hawaiian nation and its noble class thrived under this regime. King Kamehameha fashioned his kingdom in the likeness of the British monarchy with the guidance of the British advisors. Like so many of the indigenous people of the world at that time, Western disease began to take hold in the native Hawaiian populations. The number began to rapidly decline. By 1920, the US Census calculated the Hawaiian indigenous population at just over 24,000 people, a decline of over 90% of the original inhabitants of 1800 Hawaii. This exact story had played out repeatedly around the world, where European colonization met indigenous populations. This is where my Hawaiian story begins. Because of the decline of the indigenous Hawaiian population, the first immigrants to provide labor for the sugarcane and pineapple plantations on the islands were the Japanese. Then came the Chinese. By 1890, the Filipinos, and then the Portuguese. Hawaii had become an American colonial territory. My grandfathers came to the islands from the Philippines to seek a better life for themselves. My maternal grandmother, Natividad Moreno, was born on the island of Kauai in a small town called Makawele. My maternal grandfather, Prefecto Philomer from Cebu, Philippines, who worked in the fields, met my grandmother. They got married and raised a family of 8, my mother Gloria being their firstborn. My paternal grandfather, Sergio Ebalaroza from Bohol, Philippines, came to Hawaii also seeking a better life and found himself working for the newly formed Hawaiian Electric. He met and married my grandmother, Mary de Coscos, who was born and raised in Wailuku on the island of Maui. They raised 6 children, my father AloHā being the second-born son. Our Hawaiian lineage had begun. I am 5th generation Filipino, Chinese, Portuguese, Spanish, and Polynesian ancestry. I am Hawaiian in cultural identity and American in nationality. As I began to unravel the mysteries of my family of origins in my research, my story within colonization began to unfold. At first, I saw the Spanish colonizers of the Philippines in 1521 when Magellan first arrived. I discovered the Treaty of Cebu signed by my ancestors in 1565. This marked the beginning of a 370-year rule over the Philippines by the Spaniards, during which time the uprising was squashed, pillaging, and atrocities occurred. An influx of Spanish and Portuguese immigrants poured into the Philippines as Europeans sought out new lands around the globe to grow and prosper in this new emerging world. I connected with my ancestors and I heard the cries of their suffering. I became angry and frustrated over this new realization that within the Philippines, with the Philippines being colonized by the Spanish and Portuguese, within my DNA, I was both the colonized and the colonizer. Growing up in Hawaii, I had only known aloha. It was the way we connected back to the land and how the land connected all of us. For the first time, I was seeing dominion, war, rape, and murder in my ancestry at the hands of the colonizer. My ancestors colonized my ancestors. I had lived aloha my entire life. It wasn't just a greeting or salutation to me and those I grew up with. It was a way of life, not a way of life like a repeated mantra that I strive for. It was the way we lived in the now. It is the way of life on the islands. Everyone on the island worked to live aloha, to receive and give aloha. I wanted to understand the sacredness of aloha and to know its origins as well. Anecdotally, there is not much commonly known about the word aloha beyond hello, goodbye, and love. I dug into my research and I dove deep into my understanding of the word aloha, and I quickly became stuck. On the same research trip to the islands, my husband and I met with an elder and foremost modern linguist, Dr. Ku Kahalakalau. In our conversations, she pointed me in the right direction. Dr. Ku reminded me that the language of the ancient Hawaiians was never written down. There were no symbols that captured its meaning. The value of the language resided in the hearts of the people, their stories, their dance, and their culture. All that was taken away when the missionaries first came to the islands in 1820. Between the decline in the indigenous population and the mandate that forbade the use of the indigenous language and traditions of Hawaii, the culture was all but lost. It was only kept alive by a few elders who worked to preserve it at its best as any individual could over the next generations. There were a few efforts, mostly by European archaeologists and linguists, to preserve the Hawaiian culture for posterity's sake. But the real effort came in the form of a Hawaiian American child born in 1895 in her grandmother's home on the Big Island of Hawaii. Her name was Mary Kawena Pukui. Her grandmother asked her parents if she could be raised in the traditional Kanaka Maoli ways, and the request was granted. By the time Mary Pukui reached adulthood, she was fluent in the Hawaiian language. She began assisting in translations at the Bishop Museum, the designated Hawaii State Museum of Natural and Cultural History. And she worked with several scholars through the University of Hawaii. She was a traditional songwriter, hula dancer, and sacred preserver of Hawaiian culture. She was credited as being the catalyst of the Hawaiian Renaissance. In 1957, in partnership with Samuel H. Herbert from the University of Hawaii, they published the Hawaiian English Dictionary. In doing so, they not only preserved, but resurrected the Hawaiian language from inevitable extinction. In my quest to understand aloha, I decided to start there. As my husband and I made our way around the Big Island, visiting ancient sites and preserved villages, I pored over the dictionary, searching for clues to the etymology of the word aloha. I was disappointed in what I was finding because the language was oral and had only been recently resurrected. Much of the deeper roots of the words were lost. The Hawaiian dictionary had captured thousands of individual words, but didn't have any rooted etymology to speak of. Then it hit me like a hammer of inspiration, and it had been right in front of me the entire time. The word ha. It was not an uncommon word in Hawaii, but it wasn't conversationally used in the common pidgin that was utilized for everyday communication. Ha meant the breath of life in the ancient Hawaiian language, and that seemed relevant to me. Now, did alo mean anything? I quickly flipped to the A's in my Hawaiian English dictionary that was in tow everywhere I went these days. I opened a 3-pound book and ran my fingers down the page. A-I, A-J, A-K, A-L, A-L-O, A-L-O, alo, forward facing. I put it together in my mind. Alo, forward facing. Ha, the breath of life. What did that mean? What did I just discover? I turned to my husband and I told him my potential discovery and said the words aloud. Alo, forward facing, and ha, breath of life. We sat with it. Alo, forward facing, and ha, breath of life. And then it came to us. I said it first. Sharing the breath of life through dialogue. He resoundingly agreed, and I knew I had something. Aloha was not a single word of a simple and over-marketed greeting in the ancient languages of my people. It was 2 words that came together to form the sacred process of sharing the breath of life. Over the next 6 years, I worked to understand what that meant. I read and studied, but the true insight of aloha came from personal transformation. I had to come to understand that from the indigenous perspective, aloha means the sharing of our stories, the openness of our hearts to another's story, the power and healing that can be found in truly hearing and listening to another. As we engage in deep listening and the sharing of our experiences, we exchange knowledge with one another through our collective dialogue and create a new understanding of how we engage with others and the world around us. We breathe these words to each other. This is aloha, the exchange of ideas, the resolution of conflict, the changing of perspectives, and the evolution of our collective being. Breath is life. Life is sacred. So shouldn't our words be sacred too? The first step towards healing is acknowledgement. Throughout the beginning stages of research, a lot of unhealed traumas were unveiled. The kind of traumas that are weaved into generations through families of origins and the impact of colonization. The kind of trauma embedded within my epigenetic encoding. The kind of trauma that we must come to acknowledge its effects and then dig out to cease its effects on generations to come. I entered onto this path of this dual identity of being the colonizer and colonized, not knowing quite yet that the only way out of this mess was to go through it. Everything that I had discovered about aloha, engaging in deep listening and the openness to listen to another person's story, went out the window. My theories were being put to the challenge, and I was not doing a good job at developing praxis. I gravitated towards identifying the pain of my colonized ancestors and began to see my husband, a man of European descent, as a colonizer in my own home. Around us, the movement of race, equity, and inclusion was beginning to take a chapter in our country. The microaggressions born out of the biased eyes in which I was seeing my husband was encroaching on my profession. I spoke openly and personally about my disdain towards the people of European descent, and this animosity began to slip into our home. For almost 2 years, as I went through the coursework of a doctoral dissertation and continued my exploration into origins, my husband and I grew apart. I couldn't stand his colonizer presence, and he couldn't understand why he had suddenly become the enemy. We had little of anything significant to say to each other. We slept in separate beds for a time, and my weekend trips to San Francisco to be with my cohort was a reprieve for both of us. It was on one of these week-long sessions in the spring of 2016 that we found our way through. I was in Pacifica, sitting on top of a rock, watching the sunrise, when a fox popped up on an adjacent rock not 15 feet from me. A California red hawk circled above me as I sat there taking it all in. I noticed a pod of dolphins swimming just offshore at Rockaway Beach. I felt my ancestors at that moment, and I knew that I needed to make some sort of amends with my husband. He must have been feeling the same because we connected on a brief phone call. It was a beginning, and that's just what we needed in the moment. I will never forget what he said. He told me that he had thought long and hard about his whiteness and his racial identity. He began to question what it meant to be white and the origins of whiteness in general. These brought up more questions than answers. He was discovering that the veil of colonization had covered us all, and he called it living with a colonized mind. Then I said something that I never expected to say. I told him that I had spent so much time seeing the murdered and the raped and the colonized ancestors that I never stopped to realize that I also had the colonizer within me too. I am the murdered and the murderer. I am the raped and the rapist, and I am the colonizer and the colonized. This led to the emergence of my inquiry questions and to seek individuals who would not just help me with answers, but to help put my theory of AloHā into practice. I quickly discovered that the perspectives that formed my original inquiry had to change to meet my evolving understanding of the subject of decolonization. I realized that it was no longer the relevant answers, but the emergence of new questions that propelled my work forward. I found that there is no destination in finding answers, only more profound questions. And I discovered that within the answers emerged even more questions. I won't read them all, but here is an example of how the original questions emerged. The original questions that I had: how do these leaders pursue a path steeped in indigenous practices that do not perpetuate the Western worldview of othering, but a collective perspective of belonging? The emerged question: how do all people pursue a path of authenticity and connect to their indigenous ways of knowing to promote belonging and collective healing? The original question: how do these leaders successfully walk in both worlds, existing within a Eurocentric worldview, while simultaneously engaging in decolonizing one's heart and mind? The emerged question: how do we all decolonize our hearts and minds in pursuit of a path that dismantles the Eurocentric worldview? As I continued with my research, I understood how crucial it is to consider the ideas, mindsets, socializations, and biases born out of the socialization of the individuals I worked with, as well as my own. The process of ebbing and flowing through questions and answers became more of a practice rather than a study. I was learning a new way of seeing the world. It wasn't a methodology based on the solidity of answers, but the fluidity of questions. I came to understand that answers were like gravity wells. By holding firm to them, I only fell into paradigms that would be challenged by new information and experiences. When engaging in literature, I began to reflect on my existence and the multiple layers of shifting identities. Growing up as a mixed race individual born and raised on the islands of Hawaii, I never saw myself as mixed. Everyone around me looked like me, and we all enjoyed the same cultural elements. It wasn't until I went back to college that I became aware of the lack of representation of my culture and worldview in the books that I read. For most of my life, and unbeknownst to me, Western knowledge and philosophies guided my thought development about who my people were and how I would be accepted in this Eurocentric world. The stories that I would read about my Asian and Pacific Islander people described how the Pacific Islander within me was lazy, uneducated, and sometimes even violent. While the Asian part of myself, the women were described as exotic, submissive, and hypersexual. I found myself struggling to exist between these worlds, the world of the dominant West, who controlled which books would be placed on the shelves in schools, and the world of my ancestors, our oral traditions, rich cultures, and spirituality. Although there are other cultures who can find themselves straddling the complexity of these worlds and understanding that they overlap, the worlds never truly aligned for me. We can often find ourselves battling which direction to go to find a place where we genuinely fit in. During the literature search for this dissertation, I was intentional in obtaining written material by Indigenous scholars. I quickly found myself in a relationship with the stories in which I could identify. Stories mirrored my values, belief systems, and understanding of the sacred connection to all living beings and honoring relationships. I gravitated toward these philosophical practices that aided the cultivation of AloHā. Given the centrality of decolonizing processes in Indigenous research and methods, I dove deep into scholarship and explored the literature structured around the acronym of AloHā, ALOHA. Although Western academia requests a more linear reductionist framework that intellectually critiques the literary work of others, I chose to utilize AloHā, ALOHA, as a theoretical framework that honors not just how our brains and intellect are in relationship with the literature, but also acknowledges how our bodies and spirit respond to the content. The first is ask questions and inquire. The value of inquiry is a process of learning that involves investigating multiple sources of information, thinking critically to make sense of the information gathered, and doing it with humility that appreciates our own ignorance and unfamiliarity with others' experiences. Do not assume. By asking questions with the intent to learn and not judge, we have the potential to minimize gross assumptions. We all make basic assumptions in life, but sometimes those assumptions are wrong. And with little or no evidence that proves our theory, it could cause a world of hurt for many. Finding the courage to ask questions and challenge our beliefs can lead to significant transformation. As I engage in the work of the Indigenous author, Gerry Mitchell, she brings forth what she describes as sacred activism by inviting both Native and non-Native people to discuss ways of healing the trauma of colonization shared by all. Mitchell opens the platform for deep listening and transformative dialogue by inviting the spirit of compassion and empathy. More importantly, Mitchell speaks of the conflict that arises when we engage in uncomfortable conversations, even as we are willing to pivot and face the discomfort with the intent towards healing. Mitchell's belief is that a critical component of transforming conflict is a willingness to sit with those who disagree with our position, and that we must be willing to listen closely to what they are saying, to hear their needs, and then work towards finding the apex of where the needs of all parties converge. The next is L, listen with the intention to understand and not judge. The act of listening is only possible when there is attention. And attention does not exist if there is interpretation, evaluation, condemnation, or judgment of that to which you are listening. If you listen completely and attentively, that very act of listening has the potential to open doors that could lead to a common truth. The act of listening is an open field of possibility. In this field, every kind of seed is sown, and the only seed that has vitality, energy, strength will come up and flourish. When we listen fully and completely, the very act of listening destroys what is false and lets the seed of truth take root. Furthermore, listening is actually a way of hearing the other person in which we are fully present with what is happening in the moment, without trying to control it or judge it. We do this by letting go of our inner clamoring and our usual assumptions and listen with respect for precisely what is being said. How can we move towards healing relationships if we're not able to listen to each other? We usually do not listen with the intent to understand. We most often listen with the intent to reply. The next is O, observe the sensations in your body. The sensations, emotions, and somatic response in our bodies are not just signals to react, but are also signals for us to contemplate what is at stake. Our bodies are full of intelligence. They tell us everything we need to know, from when we're hungry to when we're sick, and even react when we are full of emotions. Many, particularly those steeped in Western philosophical frameworks, have adopted the Cartesian worldview and belief that their mind and body are two different substances, a complete separation of the mental and physical world. But for Indigenous people, we reject that claim and know that our bodies and our minds are one. We are whole people, and we are entirely influenced by our surroundings, our conceptual thoughts, and somatic responses. We are emotional creatures. We are biological, we are spiritual, we are relational, and we are social. Somatic theory looks at the body as a place of evolutionary intelligence and learning. In the article Holographic Epistemology, Native Common Sense by Dr. Manu Alulimeyer, she tells us that for Hawaiians, it is believed that intelligence and knowledge are embedded at the core of our bodies in our stomach or na'au, which Hawaiians calls the second brain. It is the site for feeling and thinking, knowing, and being. Wisdom, or na'au, also translate as heart, emotion, and intelligence. It is the cosmic center point where our connection to all who we are unites. From the land in which our feet stand to the spiritual link with our ancestors. Knowing there is intelligence in what we feel sets the path for individuals to shift the reductionist thinking that we are incapable of holding multiple versions of reality. We can learn so much if we took the time to listen and understand the messages of our bodies. The journey towards the completion of this dissertation offered me the opportunity to examine what was happening to my body in challenging situations. It is also pertinent to remember that our experiences may be different, but the impact on our bodies can leave the same effect. Broken spirits. H is return to our heart space. Becoming a certified trainer in the heart math philosophies, I am fond of some of the literature that has been produced by this organization. The research from the Heart Math Institute concluded that intelligence and intuition are heightened when we learn to listen more deeply to our own heart. It's through learning how to decipher messages we receive from our heart that we gain the keen perception needed to effectively manage our emotions during life's challenges. The more we learn to listen to and follow our heart intelligence, the more educated, balanced, and coherent our emotions become. Without the guiding influence of the heart, we easily fall prey to reactive emotions such as insecurity, anger, fear, and blame, as well as other energy-draining reactions and behaviors. Learning to return to our heart space, especially amid adversity, is key. I must concur that our heart space is a place where the foundation of AloHā exists. Love, compassion, humility, empathy, and grace reside within this space. The heart can guide us throughout the entire process of engagement and the place to return when we find ourselves becoming judgmental and unable to deeply listen to another. The final A in ALOHA in AloHā is to acknowledge and adapt to differences. Literature has the power to change the world. It is a powerful tool of storytelling that can bring people across the globe together or keep us apart. Literature does invite us to reflect on our lives and in discussion with others, make us think. And at times, like within a dissertation, it allows us to also add in our voice. In this final acronym of AloHā, ALOHA, we acknowledge that our perspectives and worldviews may differ from others. Concepts such as gender, race, community, and nationality seem to be all born out of an innate need for us to categorize each other. The reinforcement of our socialization through media, television, education, government, family, and friends are the pillars that set the foundation for which we develop a deep sense of belonging or learn to be hostile towards others because of opposing beliefs. When we're looking to start relationships, we tend to gravitate towards people we believe are similar to how we view the world. And it becomes simpler to find ourselves imposing our worldviews on others who hold opposing views. But in restricting ourselves to the microcosm, we can often miss out on many interesting experiences that can make a great community. It is vital to acknowledge that part of the work to create healthy and thriving communities is adapting to the diverse nuances of race, nationality, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, religion, and many other aspects that make up cultured human beings. Within the nuance, we must also learn how to adapt to the complexity of our socialization and the socialization of others. The data collected from the personal narratives of my co-researchers were filtered through a lens using the phases of decolonizations. As put forth by Hawaiian indigenous scholar Pokala Inui, they are rediscovery and recovery, mourning, dreaming, commitment, and action. The 5 stages of decolonization are not necessarily a linear journey. The different stages are dynamic. Each one can appear and reappear throughout the entire process of decolonizing our hearts, minds, and soul, which can take a lifetime. These 5 phases can be a beacon for individuals to find their place in decolonization, reconcile their internalized narratives, and find a path forward. The internalized narratives in our society can be either internalized oppression or internalized superiority, depending on one's positionality within the system. But regardless of positionality, colonizer, colonized, oppressor, or oppressed, the 5 phases of decolonization can be utilized to deepen our understanding of each other and the world, creating a space for self-reflection, collective healing, and indigenous liberation. As these 5 phases become the path of decolonization, AloHā is a process one follows once on the path. AloHā is a personal practice utilized to challenge one's assumptions cyclically and feel the somatic responses within the body moving through cognitive dissonance. AloHā reminds one that staying in the heart is where the process provides its eventual exit. Finally, AloHā helps us arrive at the path of decolonization through acceptance, and adaptability. With these tools, anyone can find their starting point and move through the process of decolonization. These tools can carry us out of our racialized identity and connect us back to our ancestral wisdom. Seekers on this journey begin to disassociate with the egoic self, limiting our connection with each other and the land, and reconnecting to our humanity. The first step in the decolonizing process is where the colonized rediscovers and recovers their history, culture, language, and identity. It involves a process of interrogating the captive mind so that the colonized other and the historically oppressed can come to define in their own terms what is real to them. They can also determine their own rules on what can be known and what can be spoken, written about, how, when, and where. The power that comes from decolonizing our minds is that we can move toward rediscovering our authentic voices by recovering our true history, culture, language, and indigenous identity. According to seminal thinker La'inui, the process of mourning refers to lamenting the continued assault on the identity and social realities of the historically oppressed and colonized. As we enter into the next phase of the decolonization process, mourning, the expression of deep sorrow that we feel in this phase is not the same as if we mourned someone who has died. What we mourn is the death of language, ceremony, culture, and ways of knowing and being. La'inui also states that mourning forms an important part of healing and moves the individual or community towards dreaming. The third phase of decolonization involves us calling upon the force of dreaming. La'inui believes that dreaming is the most crucial phase in the process of decolonization. In this phase, dreams invoke indigenous knowledge systems, literature, and worldviews, where hope drives a collaborative experience that lifts the voices of indigenous communities and reimagines other possibilities. Each of us holds our worldview. Our perspective and view on the world provides us with a sense of reality and enables us to make sense of the world. It supports our identity, grounds us in our culture, and maintains a sense of belonging. Our dreams act as a compass and help us choose a path guided by our ancestors in this dream world. We connect with our social and spiritual base in our dreams, energies linking to our cultural heritage and shaping our choices that shape our way forward exist in our dreams. Dreaming is followed by the commitment to be responsible to the communities of research and address the challenges of including all voices of the colonized. Indigenous scholar Tayake Alfred speaks on the importance of leadership and the commitment to ensure that our communities are rooted in tradition and remain consistent with the cultural values of the community. Commitment of leaders who are storytellers, collaborators, educators, and artists are skilled in listening intently to others. They pave the way for building relationships and respect the reciprocity and reflexivity of research, connecting us back to our ancient wisdom and culture. This is a key element in restoring the necessary harmony between human systems and structures. This brings us to the final phase of decolonization. In this phase, Pokalaʻinui states that our dreams and commitments translate into strategies for social transformation and co-liberation. But I would like to say that it is in the action phase of decolonization. It is our commitment to our dreams that generate the motivation to act towards creating the life where we all thrive. I believe that our dreams act as a compass to help us envision a different world, tapping into our greatest resources within us and around us. We begin to see ourselves in a new light as having a greater potential and being capable of stretching and growing to reach our goals. We create our future and act towards it by chasing our dreams. In this dissertation, I chose to utilize narrative methodology, a form of qualitative research in which the stories become the data. For many Indigenous people, this interpretive approach is the most natural way for me to recount experiences, convey implicit knowledge, make sense of the world, and share how stories construct our identity and shape our reality. The notion that empirical evidence is sounder than cultural knowledge permeates Western thought, but alienates many Indigenous scholars. Rather than their cultural knowledge being seen as extra intellectual, it is denigrated. It is the notion of the superiority of empirical knowledge that leads to the idea that written text supersedes the oral tradition of storytelling. Therefore, there is a limit of concern in that this study has a potential bias from Western academia that storytelling is not a viable source of statistical analysis. My chosen methodology of observation and gathering of data through stories have often been criticized for lacking transparency and scientific rigor. Narrative methodology has been censored for being a compilation of impressions that are subjected to researcher bias and cannot be truly replicated, as in controlled experimental conditions, and therefore are unable to be verified scientifically. However, qualitative research has the benefit of being flexible and allowing creativity, thereby providing additional insight that cannot be collected through quantitative research. The limitation of storytelling as a methodology for observation and scientific aspiration is only problematic from the colonized perspective of the scientific method. The narrative methodology is not a scientific methodology and should not be confused as such. It does not require empirical evidence, but it does require observational and experiential learning, the reflection of lived experiences that facilitate the move from theory to practice. It does not require strict observation toward the adherence of one's thesis, but it does require understanding how the experience affects the observer, those around them, and the effects and outcomes. The strength of narrative methodology has value far beyond building social skills, work ethics, and practical expertise that are importantly traditionally quantitative, are important in traditionally quantitative Eurocentric programs. The gathering of experiential data can also lead to more powerful academic learning and help students achieve intellectual goals commonly associated with liberal education, including the capacity for critical thinking and application of knowledge in complex or ambiguous situations. This journey it's a spiritual one that is in a constant evolution of change. Sherry Mitchell reminds us that there is no haven to rest and dwell on this spiritual journey. If we settle down into any one place, then we stop growing. It takes courage to follow the path into a place where answers don't easily come, and that we may be left with more questions. Still, it does lead us to elevate stages of consciousness and continue to expand our awareness. I've learned that the best place to seek answers is within. When I can connect with my inner teacher and my liberated heart, I begin to see that the answers also exist around me, and I prepare for new questions to emerge from them. As a storyteller, my strength is found in oral narrative. I excel at sharing my story. He alo e he alo, face to face. In a Eurocentric academy, I was challenged to meet Westernized standards. But as I learned how to juxtapose the rigid Westernized process of writing a contributing thesis into the analog of academia with an intuitive process of my indigenous ancestors' ways of knowing, I found the wisdom to lean into their epistemologies as healers, ancient astronomers, natural biologists, and tribal social scientists. I no longer discounted or diminished the way of their contributions to understanding the world. I utilize this new learning to write a method of self-awareness and process for personal transformation tied to both the ancestral and modern social sciences, which I call the evolution of AloHā. As I breathe through my reflections on this journey, I remember thinking that my indigeneity had no place in a Eurocentric world. I worked hard to assimilate into the dominant culture only to find that I was never truly whole. Even as I sent out invitation to this event, I prefaced the invitation with, remember, I'll be talking about an indigenous framework. I was quickly reminded that I do not need to make others feel comfortable about who I am. These negative thoughts are examples of how the colonized mind works and why it is crucial to dismantle its internalized voices. I limit myself and hold myself back with my struggles of worthiness and empowerment. Yet, I also understand that if I lean too heavily into my power, I risk becoming overconfident in my gifts. This is where humility comes into play. Through humility, we balance between the worlds and heal the wound of colonization. The process of decolonization is a constant. There are varying waves of emotions within each phase that ebbs and flows, and each stage consists of trials and errors. The struggle is in finding the balance within these trials. The theory of AloHā, forward facing in front, the guiding principles of AloHā, ALOHA, has been a personal methodology for navigating the process of decolonization by engaging spiritual medicine that creates personal transformation. The philosophy of AloHā is holistic, and it is intellectual, emotional, and physical. It requires multiple forms of medicine to learn how to move through the wave of potential possibility. It's been quite a journey through the world of epistemologies, ontologies, paradigms, inquiries, praxis, and scholarship. In conclusion, a few thoughts rose to the surface as I reflected on my work with my co-researchers. I must posit that each of the participants with whom I shared sacred space and breath of life believes that this time has passed for all of us to opt out of change. Change is here. It is upon us now, and we must do something about it. With all of the chaos that is happening in our world today, it is evident that we all feel the disease, the pain, and restlessness of urgency. We're looking in the mirror and it is showing us what is wrong. It is telling us that we are in disharmony. This is the same process that takes place within our bodies when we are sick or injured. Our body sends us signals. It calls out to us with discomfort and or pain to show us what part of our body needs attention. Our world is a creation of ourselves within a larger body of creation. The large self is calling out to us now with all the pain and discomfort we feel. It is urging us to heal before the spiritual illness that we are experiencing consumes the body of creation. We are being invited to join in a global awakening. We're being asked to set down our egoist pursuits and join our voices in a humble song. We're being instructed to align our breath, our ha, our breath of life with that of the divine so that we can harness our collective energies and help birth a new world into being. We must breathe life into a collective vision of peace, harmony, and balance, breathing into our hopes and dreams until the vision begins to take form. Then we must hold that vision in a sacred space with gentleness and reverence so that the coming generations, our children, our grandchildren, and our grandchildren's children can walk into this world and enjoy the same right to life that we have been given by our ancestors. As I reflect on this academic journey, I've realized that obtaining a PhD is more than the chosen subject or the letters following my name, which is deemed prestigious by European scholars. But for Indigenous scholars, these letters that come behind my name comes with great responsibility. The responsibility to continue to interrogate academic practices, to be inclusive by embracing Indigenous worldviews and pedagogy. Take accountability to cross-examine organizations and institutional practices that expect Indigenous staff to leave behind their cultural perspectives and epistemes to adopt Western values. This journey is a sacred journey, a journey that has a potential for a whole person and whole community transformation. I've realized that the transformation of a community begins with self. To truly create an inclusive environment, I need to be aware of my exclusive tendencies. I must employ the practice of AloHā, ALOHA, in my daily life as I engage with new ideas or narratives that challenge me. I need to be aware of how those narratives are affecting me and challenge my bias where necessary. This dissertation is alive. It is a living, breathing document. The work of aloha is spiral in nature. The reader inhales the words, they read and exhales it back out again, transformed in the process. The power of aloha is a source for fresh insight to come back to again and again. Each person coming into and back to this work contribute to their aloha by responding to the words they read and the somatic responses that elicit change. This sacred and spiritual journey is cyclical and ever evolving. It allows us to reach back to our indigenous roots and land at a place for gratitude, which plays a crucial role in co-creating cohesive communities. As Dr. Joanne Gozawa has stated upon reviewing this dissertation, she says, "I have come to understand the reaching back to ancestors as an expression of gratitude for continuous life. As such, this is another expression of perpetual interdependence. Modernizing cultures and countries seem to forever threaten our appreciation for all life, past, present, and future, in an ever cyclical relationship." The words that appear on these pages are influenced by all my experiences and the environment that surrounds me. Each paragraph holds my tears of frustration as the days of writing this dissertation turned to months and then to years. Each page is crafted as a log of the journey it took to get here and a map to what lies beyond it. At this moment, we are in a beautiful relationship of reciprocity, and I thank you for honoring this moment. As a scholar who identifies as Indigenous amongst other ethnic identities, I continue to learn to embrace the power of my positionality as a privileged, educated woman of color. I acknowledge that writing this dissertation is a privilege, and I also recognize that throughout this journey, many supported and challenged my theories, and I thank you. Albeit the latter was not always easy, discovering ways to ask questions that would elicit deeper conversations rather than placate a broken ego erred in a much sustainable relationship. It is my belief that the mana or power of aloha stretches forward for my people long ago and cover over the people of the islands today. It is my calling in life to share this expanded definition with as many people as possible and spread aloha to each of you so that in return, you can share it with others. This is my aloha, which I give to you today. There are many that I'd like to give thanks to and acknowledge for supporting my physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being as I embarked upon this journey of blending the blurred lines between being an Indigenous scholar existing in a Westernized world. I would like to once again thank and acknowledge that I would not be here if it were not for the giants whose shoulders I stand upon and who have ascended into the spiritual world, but live within my DNA. My parents, Roy Ebalaroza and Gloria Philomer, my paternal grandparents, Sergio Ebalaroza and Mary Dacoscos, my maternal grandparents, Perfecto Philomer and Natividad Moreno, to all of my aunties, my uncles, and many, many cousins who are present in this world, and also to those who have ascended into spiritual beings. I thank you for your lessons, for your love, and for your aloha. To my children and grandchildren. Thank you for continuing to awaken the mana within me by reminding me every day how the ability to love and the sacredness of aloha exists within all of us unconditionally. To my sons, Edward Mananui and Ryan Ali'inui, it has been such an honor to grow up with you and to learn the meaning of life with you. You have taught me to have the strength that I did not know I had and to work through the kind of fears that I never knew existed. And I am so honored to be your mother. To my grandsons, Lyric and Kaimana, and to my future grandchildren, I hope that the world I leave behind is better than it was the day you were born. You have been my muse, my inspiration, and the lyrics to my heart work, and I am honored to be your grandmother. To my daughter-in-laws, Jessica, Kim, and Alicia, I thank you so much for loving my sons the way you have and for bringing into the world and raising the next generation of warriors, scholars, educators, and leaders. I have enjoyed watching you grow into powerful women, and I hope that I have empowered you as much as you have empowered me. Thank you for helping me to believe in my own magic. To my husband, my partner, and my best friend, you have been my source of strength, encouragement, and motivation, and the platform for transformation since the start of this academic journey. Thank you for continuing to teach me the value of reciprocity as we continue to learn mutual recognition. I am so honored to be your wife. To my siblings, Chris, Bernie, Michelle, Mark, and Roy, and my many nieces and nephews, you have challenged me, and at the same time, without you even knowing it, you have compelled me to continue this journey with more joyous tenacity. Mom and Dad are proud of us, and I am so proud to be your sister. To all of my friends, my family, and my colleagues, which there are way too many of you to name, but you know who you are. Thank you for being my sounding board, my sphere of influence, my voice of reason, and most of all, my mentors and my inspiration. Thank you for being on this journey with me, and I will now be available for outings, coffee, and time at the spa. Thank you to my chair, May Elawar. I knew from the moment I met you in the lobby during my first cohort that we would have a future together. Dr. Joanne Gozawa, thank you for your wisdom and gift of reflection. You have been an inspiration to me from the start. Dr. Alma Trinidad, Salamat Apo, and mahalo for sharing your na'a'au and your mana, your power and energy. Mahalo for stepping into my life. For all of my co-researchers, you have modeled for me what it takes to challenge an educational system where the voices of Indigenous scholars can go unheard and unrecognized. Thank you, my committee members, my co-researchers. Thank you for embracing my spirit and empowering my voice. Your guidance, your wisdom, and your aloha will remain with me forever. Before we depart, I would like to invite my sister Bernie to close our time together. The song that she will be dancing to is called Mele Ohana. And this song is for all of us. It is a song about family. And you do not have to share the same blood as me to be my family. We are Ohana. Mahalo so much for being here with me. And thank you.
I lift my voice up to my family, whose love I wear upon my chest. This is my gift of love for you, from this land that has nurtured me, 'cause it remains here in my heart, cared forever by God. Here is my love.